to my video on reteaching proportions classwork. Now, I know this is a classwork assignment, but I decided to do this as a guided classwork assignment. So that is why I'm I'm making a video for this. So let's look at the example at the top. Now, these are going to be different than the proportions we used for unit rate because unit rates, we were using a proportion per 1. So we always had a 1 in our proportion because we were finding a unit rate. Now these will not have a 1 in our proportion because we're not finding out how much for 1 here. So a certain machine can produce 7 parts in 2 hours. At this rate, how many parts can be produced in 8 hours? Okay, now in our previous examples, we used X, and now here they're using N, okay? So you can use any letter you want. So it says N is going to stand for the number of parts made in 8 hours, because that's what we want to know. You can compare the number of parts to the number of hours. Now look what they did in this example. They put parts over hours, so 7 over 2. We don't know how many parts in 8 hours, so they put N over 8. Okay, now this looks a little bit different than the way we solve it, but it's still the same thing. Okay, and what they got over here was 56 equals 2 times N, and then they divided both sides by 2, and of course the answer is 28. So write 28. Now look over here. You can compare the number of hours to the number of parts. So remember when we did the proportions, I told you that you could do parts over hours or hours over parts. So that's what they did here. They did hours over parts, so they put 2 over 7. And now notice they put the 8 hours on top and the parts on the bottom, because that's what we're looking for. 2 times N is 2N. 7 times 8 is 56. And then they divided both sides by 2, and they still got 28. So as long as you're consistent, it doesn't matter if you put parts over hours or hours over parts, as long as you're consistent on both sides. So that means in 8 hours, the machine can make 28 parts. Okay, now let's look at some examples. It says use a proportion to solve each problem. In 3 hours, 225 cases of corn can be canned. Underline. At that rate, how many cases of corn can be canned in 8 hours? Okay, so we know how many cans of corn can be made in 3 hours. So I'm going to write that as a ratio. So I'm going to put the hours on top, and I'm going to put the cases of corn on the bottom. So 225. Okay, now we want to know how many cans in 8 hours. So I'm going to put the 8 on top and the X on the bottom. So once again, like we learned the other day, circle the number diagonal to the variables. So 3 times X is 3X. 225 times 8 is 1,800. The opposite of multiplication is division. So we're going to divide both sides by 3. And X will equal 600. Circle your answer. And then they already have the label for us, so I didn't put a label here. So 600 cases of corn can be canned. Okay, now let me draw a line here. Okay, let's look at number 2. Now, after I do number 2, if you're really comfortable with these, you can pause the video and try 3 and 4 on your own. But just watch number 2, and then if you're comfortable, pause the video for 3 and 4. A plane traveled 1,900 kilometers in 2 hours. Underline that. At this rate, how far will the plane travel in 3 hours? So I know how far it can travel in 2 hours, so I'm going to write that as a ratio. I'm going to put kilometers on top. And I'm going to put hours on the bottom. So my H is on the bottom. Now, kilometers over hours. And I know that I'm going to figure out 3 hours of travel time, but I don't know how many kilometers that is, so I'm going to put the X here. So kilometers over hours, kilometers over hours. Okay, and now this is the easy part. 2 times x is 2x. Draw your line segment to 3. 1,900 times 3 is 5,700. The opposite of multiplication is division, so I'm going to divide both sides by 2. 2 divided by 2 is a 1 in disguise, and I'm going to write my answer over here so I don't run into number 3. And 5,700 divided by 2 is 2,850. Now, normally I would put the label. However, when I put the answer here, the label is already there. So 2,850 kilometers. Now, if you feel comfortable, pause the video. If not, just keep watching. Okay, welcome back if you paused the video. And if you didn't, you were already here. Okay, a duplicating machine can produce 50 copies in 2 minutes. At this rate, how long will it take to produce 150 copies? Now, I'm talking about copies in minutes here. So I know that it can do 50 copies in 2 minutes. So I'm going to write that as a ratio. So copies over minutes. And I don't know how long, so I want to figure that out. So I'm going to put X on the bottom because that's the minutes. How long it will take to do 150 copies. So now I got copies over minutes, copies over minutes. I'm ready to go. So circle the variable. 50 times X is 50X. 150 times 2 is 300. And the opposite of multiplication is division, so I divide both sides by 50. And X will equal 6. It's already labeled here, so just put in 6, and then it's labeled minutes. Okay, the last one. Now, you don't see 3 numbers, but look here. 6 cases. There's my number. They just use words instead of the actual number, like they did in the previous problems. Weigh 180 pounds. How much would 10 such cases weigh? Okay, so I have cases in pounds. So 6 cases, 180 pounds. So I'm going to just do 6 over 180. So I did cases over pounds. Remember, though, I could have done pounds over cases. It doesn't matter. And I know that we have 10 cases, and we know we want to find the pounds. So I'm going to put X on the bottom. So 6 times X is 6X. I'm just going to move over here where I have more room. 180 times 10 is 1,800. The opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 6. 6 divided by 6 is a 1 in disguise. So X will equal 300. So 10 cases weighs 300 pounds. Okay, that concludes our classwork on reteaching proportions. I hope you have a wonderful day.